In a warehouse on Staten Island, New York, in the early 1940s, 1,200 tons of ore sat quietly in steel drums, guarded, unmarked, and almost completely unknown to the outside world. No sign identified what was inside. No shipping manifest described its true importance. The man who had ordered it stored there, a Belgian mining executive named Edgar Sengier, had made a decision months earlier that would turn out to be one of the most consequential private choices of the entire Second World War. And almost nobody at the time understood why. That ore came from a mine in the Belgian Congo, a mine most of the world had never heard of, in a region most people could not have found on a map, extracting a mineral that, up until just a few years earlier, had almost no commercial value at all. The mine was called Shinkolobwe. The mineral was uranium, and the decision to quietly stockpile it thousands of miles from where it was dug out of the ground would help put the most destructive weapon ever built into American hands before Nazi Germany could get there first. This is the story of Shinkolobwe, the richest uranium deposit ever discovered on Earth, buried in a Belgian colony in Central Africa, and the secret, decades-long scramble by empires, spies, and superpowers to control it. To understand how strange this story really is, you have to start with the fact that uranium, for most of its known history, was considered essentially worthless. The mineral was first identified in the Congo around 1915, in the Katanga region in the far southeast of the colony, an area already known to Belgian mining interests for its enormous copper reserves. Prospectors working for a company called Union Minière du Haut Katanga were primarily interested in copper and cobalt, the region's genuinely valuable exports at the time. But at Shinkolobwe, they also found something else. A heavy, unusually radioactive rock known by the German mining term pitchblende, literally meaning worthless rock, a name chosen centuries earlier by miners in Europe who had encountered similar ore and found no use for it whatsoever. The only element inside it anyone cared about in the 1920s and 1930s was radium, a genuinely valuable substance at the time, prized for its glow-in-the-dark properties used in watch dials and instrument panels, and for early, poorly understood cancer treatments pioneered by Marie and Pierre Curie. Union Minière mined Shinkolobwe for its radium and largely discarded the uranium that came up alongside it as waste. That changed almost overnight in 1938, when physicists in Germany discovered nuclear fission, the process by which splitting the nucleus of a uranium atom releases an enormous burst of energy. The discovery itself happened almost by accident, the result of chemists observing reaction products they could not initially explain, before physicist Lise Meitner, working in exile in Sweden after fleeing Nazi persecution, worked out the theoretical explanation that made sense of what her former colleagues in Berlin had found. Word of the discovery spread quickly through the small, tightly connected world of theoretical physics, and it did not take long for scientists who had themselves fled Nazi persecution to grasp the terrifying implication. If fission could be controlled and scaled up, it might be possible to build a weapon more powerful than anything in human history. Among those scientists was Leo Szilard, a Hungarian physicist living in exile, who became convinced that Nazi Germany, having just occupied Czechoslovakia and its own uranium-producing mines, might already be racing toward exactly this kind of weapon. In August 1939, Szilard and a colleague drafted a letter, ultimately signed by Albert Einstein and sent directly to President Franklin Roosevelt, warning of the danger and specifically flagging one crucial detail. The richest known uranium deposits in the entire world sat not in Europe, not in the United States, but in the Belgian Congo. Einstein's letter set in motion a chain of decisions that would eventually become the Manhattan Project. But it was Edgar Senghir, the Union Minière executive, who had already, quietly and independently, made the single most important logistical decision of the entire effort, months before. American scientists had even fully organized themselves. When Nazi Germany invaded Belgium in May 1940, Senghir understood immediately what was at stake. He knew Shinkolobwe held uranium reserves unlike anything found anywhere else on the planet. He knew Germany, now occupying his home country, might move to seize Congo's mineral wealth, or at minimum cut off Belgian control over it. Rather than wait for instructions from a government that had just collapsed under Nazi occupation, Senghir made an independent choice. He arranged for roughly 1,200 tons of uranium ore, already extracted and stored above ground at the mine, to be shipped out of the Congo entirely, across the Atlantic, to New York, where it sat, quietly, in that unmarked Staten Island warehouse, waiting for a buyer that did not yet officially exist. That buyer arrived in 1942 in the person of Colonel Kenneth Nichols, an engineer working for what would soon become the Manhattan Project's procurement arm. When American military planners finally began seriously assessing where they could obtain uranium at the volume and purity a bomb program would require, they surveyed the world's known deposits, a mine in Canada, scattered low-grade sources across the Colorado Plateau in the American West, and Shinkolobwe. The comparison wasn't close. Ore from the American Colorado Plateau typically contained a fraction of 1% uranium oxide, sources that, after the war, the Atomic Energy Commission would consider a good find at merely 0.3% purity. The ore Senghir had shipped to Staten Island contained 65% uranium oxide, not marginally richer, more than 200 times richer than what American mines could reliably produce. Nichols later described Shinkolobwe in terms that undersold just how strange the geological accident really was, as representing what one Army colonel called a freak occurrence in nature, a concentration of uranium unlike anything ever found before, or, in the decades since, ever found again anywhere on Earth. Nichols purchased the entire 1,200-ton stockpile, essentially on the spot. It was not remotely enough. The Manhattan Project's uranium needs would eventually run into the tens of thousands of tons of ore, and the mine at Shinkolobwe itself, officially closed since the mid-1930s once its radium market had softened, needed to be reopened and pushed back into full production, fast and in near total secrecy. Union Minière agreed. Additional ore, another 3,000 tons stored above ground at the mine site, plus vast quantities of lower-grade tailings, waste rock from years of earlier radium extraction that still carried meaningful uranium content, was purchased and shipped across an ocean actively patrolled by German U-boats hunting exactly this kind of Allied cargo traffic. Keeping this operation hidden from Nazi Germany became one of the most tightly guarded secrets of the entire war. A secrecy that extended remarkably even to most of the American government itself. Only an extremely small circle of officials understood the true scale and purpose of the Congo uranium program. General Leslie Groves, the blunt, relentless Army engineer who ran the Manhattan Project's day-to-day operations, treated Congolese uranium security as a matter of the highest possible priority, second only to the bomb design work itself. The American intelligence service of the era, the Office of Strategic Services, sent operatives directly into the Belgian Congo, specifically to guard against smuggling. because established smuggling routes already existed, carrying valuable minerals out of the colony toward buyers willing to pay in wartime black markets, and nobody could be certain some of those routes weren't already being used, or could easily be used, to move uranium toward Germany instead. The man the OSS chose to run this operation, a civil engineer named Wilbur "Doc" Hogue, arrived in the Belgian Congo in late 1943 with a cover story about surveying business interests, and spent the following months quietly mapping the colony's transport routes, cultivating contacts inside the mining companies, and monitoring the ports through which minerals moved toward the coast. He was joined the following year by Henry Steele, whose peacetime background running a family silk business gave him a plausible commercial reason to be moving through Congolese trading circles without raising suspicion. Neither man's work has ever received the public recognition given to more famous wartime intelligence operations, in large part because the mission's entire purpose depended on almost nobody ever learning it had happened at all. A strange kind of heroism that, by design, left behind almost no trail to later celebrate. That fear was not paranoid speculation. It was, at least partially, already happening. By the fall of 1944, American intelligence discovered that some Belgian mining and trading interests in the Congo had, in fact, sold quantities of uranium ore to buyers connected to Germany, despite the supposed secrecy and control surrounding the entire trade. The post-war reckoning for this breach was severe by any standard. More than 1,200 people across the Belgian colonial administration and mining sector were eventually sentenced to death for wartime collaboration-related offenses, though only a fraction of those sentences, roughly 240, were actually carried out. The uranium that reached Germany through these leaks contributed to a German nuclear research program that, fortunately for the Allies, never came close to matching the scale, funding, or organizational coherence of the Manhattan Project, and never produced a working weapon before the war ended. The American project did. On the 6th of August, 1945, an atomic bomb built substantially from Congolese uranium was dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second bomb, incorporating plutonium derived in part from the same uranium supply chain, was dropped on Nagasaki. Historians studying the Manhattan Project's uranium sourcing have estimated that the majority of the uranium used across the entire American nuclear weapons program in this period. By some accounts, nearly 2/3 of what went into the Hiroshima bomb specifically traced back to a single mine in a Belgian colony that most of the people living under the mushroom clouds it helped create had never heard of, and would have had no way of connecting to the devastation unfolding above them. For decades afterward, the American government deliberately obscured this connection. Cover stories circulated suggesting Canadian mines had supplied the bulk of the Manhattan Project's uranium, and Canada genuinely did contribute a meaningful share, roughly 900 tons from the Eldorado Mining Company's Great Bear Lake operation, alongside smaller American sources. But the deliberate emphasis on the Canadian contribution, historians studying the period argue, functioned partly as a convenient way to deflect public attention away from the Congo's far larger role. A misdirection effective enough that the belief that Canadian uranium built the atomic bombs persisted in popular memory for generations after the war ended. The people who actually mined that uranium, meanwhile, received no recognition, no compensation, and in most cases, no acknowledgement that their labor had contributed to a weapon that reshaped the 20th century. Congolese miners at Shinkolobwe worked under the same brutal colonial labor conditions that defined Union Miniere's operations across Katanga more broadly. Conditions that decades earlier had already made the company notorious even by the standards of Belgian colonial rule, itself among the most exploitative colonial systems in African history. Under King Leopold II's personal rule over the Congo Free State, and later under formal Belgian government administration after 1908, forced labor quotas, corporal punishment, and coerced work contracts had already become standard practice across the colony's mining regions decades before uranium itself became strategically important. Union Miniere workers were paid the equivalent of a few cents a day to break rock and push ore carts, taxed at rates deliberately kept high enough to compel them into continued labor, and housed in barbed wire-ringed settlements, 8 men to a hut, that prevented them from leaving before their contracts expired. Typhoid and dysentery moved through these settlements routinely. An accepted cost of doing business built into a labor system with almost no meaningful oversight. Workers extracting some of the most radioactive material ever mined at industrial scale did so with essentially no protective equipment, no understanding of the specific dangers of radiation exposure, and no meaningful medical monitoring, housed in barrack-style compounds under conditions of what amounted to coerced labor, paid wages so low that historians studying the period have described the arrangement as a form of debt bondage. The human cost of Shinkolobwe's uranium was never counted with anything close to the precision applied to its ore grade. After the war, Shinkolobwe's strategic importance, rather than fading, intensified. When the Soviet Union successfully tested its own atomic bomb in August 1949, years earlier than most American planners had expected, the shock reverberated through Washington, and it triggered an aggressive new push to lock down every reliable uranium source American intelligence could identify or control. Shinkolobwe, still by a wide margin the richest known deposit on Earth, became a central pillar of that strategy. Security around the mine tightened dramatically through the early 1950s. A garrison was established at the site, and a supporting NATO military installation was built nearby at Kamina, specifically to help secure the region, while the nearby town of Jadotville effectively became a security checkpoint, screening foreigners moving through the area. Journalists attempting to report on the mine's operations in this period generally found themselves able to gather only scraps of information from unofficial sources. The same wall of secrecy that had shrouded the site during the war years, simply continuing, uninterrupted, into an entirely new geopolitical conflict. Between 1942 and the late 1950s, the mine supplied roughly 20,000 tons of uranium oxide to the American nuclear program, compared to less than 1,400 tons that the entire Colorado Plateau, America's own primary domestic source, had managed to produce by war's end. Shinkolobwe was not merely a contributor to America's nuclear arsenal. For the first 15 years of the atomic age, it was arguably the single most important uranium source on the planet, quietly underwriting the growth of a nuclear stockpile that would eventually number in the tens of thousands of warheads. That strategic value collided directly with the collapse of European colonialism in Africa. When the Belgian Congo won its independence on the 30th of June, 1960, the new government, led by Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba, made unmistakably clear that Congo's uranium would no longer be handed over on the generous terms Belgium had long enjoyed. Barely 2 weeks later, on the 11th of July, the mineral-rich province of Katanga, home to Shinkolobwe itself, along with the bulk of the Congo's copper and cobalt wealth, declared its secession from the newly independent country. plunging the region into a political and military crisis that drew in Belgian troops, United Nations peacekeepers, and covert intervention from multiple Cold War powers, each maneuvering, in no small part, over control of exactly the mineral wealth that had made Katanga worth fighting over in the first place. Lumumba himself would not survive the crisis. Ousted within months, he was captured, transferred into Katangan custody, and executed in January 1961, in circumstances that remain, to this day, the subject of intense historical scrutiny into the degree of Belgian and American involvement in his removal. A removal that, whatever its full cast of participants, unmistakably served the interests of Western governments and mining companies anxious about a Congolese leader who had shown clear intent to renegotiate control over the country's mineral wealth on far less favorable terms than his predecessors had accepted. By the time that crisis finally settled, the American government had already moved to formally close down its uranium operations at Shinkolobwe, wary of leaving such a strategically vital resource exposed to the instability of a newly independent, politically fractured Congo. Union Minière itself, anticipating exactly this kind of upheaval, had already begun sealing the mine's shafts with concrete before independence was even formally granted. A deliberate physical act of denial, ensuring that if the company could not control the uranium, at minimum, no one else easily could either. Sealing a mine with concrete, it turns out, is not the same as making it disappear. For decades after its official closure, informal miners continued digging into and around Shinkolobwe's sealed pit, drawn by the value of residual uranium, copper, and cobalt still present in the surrounding ground, working in desperately unsafe conditions with essentially no radiation protection of any kind. In 2004, a tunnel collapse at the site killed 8 miners and injured more than a dozen others. A disaster serious enough that it forced international attention back onto a mine most of the world had assumed was safely relegated to history. Congolese authorities responded by demolishing the informal mining settlement that had grown up around the site. But the underlying pressure, poverty, unmet demand for valuable minerals, and a region whose entire economy for a century had revolved around exactly this kind of extraction, never fully went away. International anxiety over the mine's contents persisted well into the 21st century. A 2006 press report, citing an unpublished United Nations inquiry, alleged that uranium from Shinkolobwe was being sought for illicit export, a claim that, whatever its ultimate accuracy, illustrates how a mine officially closed for over 4 decades has never fully escaped its reputation as a potential source of the world's most dangerous material. The pattern set at Shinkolobwe, moreover, did not end with uranium. Roughly 300 kilometers northwest of the old mine, the modern city of Kolwezi now sits atop nearly half of the world's known cobalt reserves, a mineral whose global demand has exploded over the past decade due to its essential role in the batteries powering smartphones and electric vehicles. The scale of extraction around Kolwezi today, driven substantially by Chinese mining interests that acquired much of the region's industrial infrastructure after Western companies retreated following the 2008 financial crisis, bears an uncomfortable resemblance to the intensity of extraction that once defined wartime Shinkolobwe. Vast open-pit operations worked by tens of thousands of laborers, under conditions that labor and human rights researchers continue to describe as exploitative, feeding a global technology supply chain. Most consumers never think to trace back to its source. Katanga, it turns out, has spent more than a century supplying the mineral inputs for whatever technological revolution the rest of the world happened to be having at the time. Radium for early medicine, uranium for the atomic age, cobalt for the age of the smartphone and the electric car, with strikingly little of that value ever staying behind in the province that produced it. Today, the true scale of Shinkolobwe's contribution to the nuclear age remains only partially acknowledged, even in the Democratic Republic of Congo itself, where public memory of the mine's role in ending the Second World War competes uneasily with the region's ongoing struggles. Extreme poverty in a province sitting atop extraordinary mineral wealth, environmental contamination from decades of unregulated extraction, and periodic international anxiety over whether residual uranium at the site might still find its way onto black markets connected to nuclear proliferation. Advocacy groups in the DRC have periodically called for formal recognition and compensation for Congolese miners and their descendants, a request that has, so far, gone largely unanswered by the governments, American, Belgian, and otherwise, that benefited most directly from what came out of that ground. Two cities, an ocean and a continent away from Katanga, were fundamentally reshaped in August 1945 by ore extracted from a mine most of their own citizens had never heard of, worked by miners who received essentially nothing for a discovery that changed the course of human history. There is no monument at Shinkolobwe honoring what was found there, no museum explaining to visitors what the freak occurrence in nature beneath that patch of Congolese savanna ultimately made possible. There is a sealed radioactive pit, a scattering of unofficial diggers still working its edges, and a story that for most of the 8 decades since it began, the powers who profited from it worked hardest to keep exactly where Edgar Senghir first put it. Quiet, unmarked, and almost entirely out of view.